When you open PMBOK Guide 8th edition, a lot of people have the same reaction. Why does this feel like two different books? That's because it is, and this is intentional. The first part is the standard for project management. This is where PMI sets the foundation. Not tools, not templates, but how project work is meant to be understood in modern organizations. This is where PMI explains what actually matters. You'll see the value delivery system, the principles that guide decisions, life cycles and development approaches, performance domains, and tailoring, not as an option, but as an expectation. This part isn't telling you what buttons to push. It's about judgment, how decisions are made, how value is protected, and how project work fits into a bigger system without prescribing a single way to do the work. Then comes the second part, a guide to the project management body of knowledge. This is where things get practical. The guide doesn't replace the standard. It doesn't override it, it supports it. Here you'll find models that help you think, methods you might apply, and artifacts you could use along the way. None of it is mandatory. None of it is presented as the right way. It's a toolbox, not a checklist. The standard explains why and how to think. The guide shows what you might use. Together, they reflect how project management works today. Not as a single methodology, not as a rigid process flow, but as a system where thinking comes first, and tools exist to support decisions and not replace them. Once you see the structure, the book stops feeling confusing and it starts feeling intentional. If you're trying to figure out what PMBOK 8 wants from you, here's the simplest way to see it. It's not telling you what to do, it's teaching you how to think. PMBOK 8 is a principle-based standard. That means it doesn't hand you steps, it gives you judgment. It's a value delivery framework, not a promise that everything will ship on time. A reminder to keep asking, is this still worth doing? And it's a decision support guide, not a rulebook and not a checklist. Nothing in it tells you there's one correct path. It exists for the moments where the path isn't obvious. That's why it works whether your project is predictive, adaptive, hybrid, or starting to feel more like product work and less like project work. Here's the real shift. If you treat PMBOK 8 like a methodology, it'll feel vague. If you treat it like instructions, it'll feel incomplete. But if you treat it like a compass, it finally makes sense. It doesn't move the project forward for you. It helps you choose the direction. PMBOK 8 is the latest version of the PMBOK, and of course there's going to be some changes. The difference starts here. The preface makes one thing clear right away. The changes in PMBOK 8 aren't random, they're intentional. They're grouped into 4 major shifts. The first shift is about language, but not semantics. PMI updated the core definitions, not to be clever, but to reflect reality. What a project means now isn't just work with a start and an end. It's about creating value in environments that don't sit still. And what project management now means isn't just managing tasks. It's applying judgment, principles, skills, tools, techniques to make value actually happen. That shift mirrors what's been happening around you. Markets move faster, expectations are higher, and your role has expanded, whether anyone updated your job description or not. You're not just delivering outputs anymore. You're navigating trade-offs, you're protecting value, and making decisions when the answer isn't obvious. That's why value creation shows up everywhere in PMBOK 8, not as a buzzword, but as the point. These updated definitions are not academic. They're PMI saying we see how the work is changing, and this standard is going to change with it. And that sets the tone for everything that's going to come next. The second shift is about focus. PMBOK didn't add more principles, it did the opposite. It reduced them. Not because the work got simpler, but because clarity matters more than coverage. The problem wasn't that the principles were wrong, it's that there were too many of them, and many of them saying similar things in slightly different ways. So PMI simplified. Fewer principles, clearer intent. Not guidance you have to memorize, but guidance you can actually use when pressure shows up. Because when a real decision lands, when time is tight, when trade-offs collide, you don't need a long list. You need a small set of principles that you can rely on. That's what this refinement is doing. Removing overlap, reducing ambiguity, and making it easier to act with consistency instead of hesitation. PMBOK 8 isn't trying to give you more to remember. It's trying to give you less to doubt. The third shift fixes one of the most misunderstood concepts in project management. The process groups are back, but not the way you remember them. They're no longer steps you march through. They've been reintroduced as focus areas: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Same names, different intent. PMBOK 8 is clear about something that people already know from experience. Real work doesn't move in a straight line. You initiate while you execute. You plan while you monitor. You start closing pieces before everything is finished. These focus areas exist to keep your attention in the right place, not to lock you in a sequence. And just as important, PMI makes something explicit that used to just be implied. Formal processes are only one way that work gets done. Sometimes it's a meeting. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's an informal decision that moves everything forward. PMBOK 8 isn't lowering the bar. It's aligning the model with how projects actually move, iteratively, concurrently, and often imperfectly. The fourth shift is where everything comes together. PMBOK 8 stops separating work into silos. What used to live in isolated knowledge areas is now integrated into project performance domains, because that's how decisions actually happen. 7 domains, not to organize documents, but to organize thinking. Alongside them, PMI introduces 40 processes with an important caveat. They're non-prescriptive, optional, supportive. Each domain gives you just enough information to stay grounded. Key concepts so you know what matters. Processes you can draw from when they help. And tailoring considerations so context always comes first. That emphasis is intentional. PMBOK 8 assumes your project doesn't look like anyone else's. Different risks, different constraints, different stakes. So instead of telling you what to do, it gives you a framework so you can decide what fits. This update isn't about adding complexity. It's about replacing rigid separation with integration and trusting you to apply it where it counts. If you ever felt like project management gets treated as side work, this is where that idea gets corrected. The introduction doesn't ease you in, it repositions you. It makes one thing clear right away. Projects aren't side work. They're how organizations change on purpose. Project management isn't about sitting on the edge of the business anymore. It's embedded in how strategy gets executed, how risk is managed, and how value gets delivered. That's the shift. Your project doesn't exist on its own. It isn't an isolated effort with a start and an end. It's part of a larger system. Strategy, governance, product, operations, and feedback. And what you're managing isn't just work. You're managing how value moves through that system. Once you see that, the rest of the standard stops feeling theoretical. It starts feeling like a map of where you already are. This section exists to set expectations clearly. The standard isn't trying to tell you how to run your project. It's giving you a reference you can use anywhere in any industry, without forcing you into a single way of thinking. That's why it's principle-based, not a methodology, not something you follow step by step. The emphasis shifts immediately. Value delivery matters more than output delivery. What changes because of the project matters more than what gets handed over. Professional judgment matters more than compliance. Following a process perfectly doesn't help if it leads to the wrong outcome. And adaptability matters more than consistency. The work looks different across industries and delivery approaches, so the guidance has to flex with it. The standard exists to support your decisions, to help you stay aligned when trade-offs appear, not to prescribe tools, templates, or mandatory processes. PMBOK 8 is not here to replace your thinking. It's here to back it up when decisions get hard. This section slows things down on purpose, because if the definitions are off, every decision that follows will be too. PMBOK 8 updates the foundational terms not to rewrite history, but to reflect how the work is actually being done now. A project isn't just temporary work anymore. It's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create value through a unique outcome. Value isn't a side effect. It's the reason the project exists. Project management isn't task coordination. It's the application of principles, skills, tools, and techniques used to deliver that value. Judgment is built into the definition. Value itself is defined by worth and usefulness to the stakeholders and to the organization. If neither sees it, it doesn't count. Stakeholders aren't a list. They're anyone who can affect the project or be affected by it. Ignoring that doesn't simplify the project, it hides risk. And governance isn't bureaucracy. It's the framework that enables decisions, accountability, insight, and alignment when pressure shows up. Taken together, these decisions signal a shift from executing tasks to creating value, from controlling work to stewarding outcomes, from documenting activity to supporting decisions. This section isn't meant to be memorized. It's meant to recalibrate how you see the work before the rest of the standard asks you to apply it. This is where PMBOK 8 widens the lens. Projects don't float above the organization. They're shaped by it. This section explains how project work fits inside real operating environments, with strategies already in motion, constraints already in place, and systems that don't pause just because a project starts. Your project is influenced by governance, culture, structure, and operations, whether you plan for it or not. Ignoring that doesn't make execution cleaner. It just makes friction harder to explain. PMBOK 8 grounds you here on purpose. Before it talks about domains, processes, or tailoring, it makes one thing clear. Project management is not an isolated discipline. It's embedded in how organizations decide, fund, operate, and change. And once you see that, you stop asking, why is this so hard? You start asking, what system am I actually working inside? This is where PMBOK 8 draws a clear line. A project is temporary. It has a real start and a real end. Not when the work gets tiring, but when the purpose is fulfilled or no longer valid. A project is unique. Even when it looks familiar, it creates something new or something meaningfully changed. That's why repetition doesn't equal certainty. Projects are purpose-driven. They don't exist to stay busy, they exist to deliver value. And if that purpose disappears, the project should too. And every project operates under uncertainty. If everything were known, predictable, and repeatable, it wouldn't be a project. It would be operations. Operations sustain the business. Projects introduce change into it. PMBOK 8 makes this distinction clear for a reason. When project work is treated like operations, learning gets punished and change feels like a failure. This section is a reminder. Uncertainty isn't a flaw in projects, it's the reason they exist. This section explains why some projects feel stuck before they ever even start. Projects don't invent their own rules. They operate within the organization's governance system, whether that system is clear or not. Organizational governance sets the expectations, how decisions get made, what risk is acceptable, what ethics look like under pressure. Project governance adapts that structure to the work. It translates policy into practice. It defines authority, where issues escalate, and who's accountable when trade-offs appear. Without that connection, projects drift. Strategy says one thing, execution does another, and no one is sure who's allowed to correct it. When governance is aligned, three things happen. Strategy stays consistent from intent to delivery, ethical conduct holds when shortcuts are tempting, and oversight supports progress instead of slowing it down. PMBOK 8 isn't adding bureaucracy. It's making sure that decisions don't collapse under pressure because no one is sure who has to make them. This section clears up confusion that causes real damage when it's ignored. Operations and projects are not the same thing. Operations are ongoing. They're repetitive. They keep the business running today. Projects are temporary. They introduce change. They exist to create something new or to improve what already exists. The mistake is treating one like the other. When project work is managed like operations, learning gets punished and change feels disruptive. And when operations are managed like projects, stability disappears. PMBOK 8 explains how the two are meant to work together. Projects create, improve, or modify operational capabilities. They build what operations will eventually sustain. That's why transition matters. Deliverables don't just get handed off. They move deliberately into operational use, with the knowledge, ownership, and support needed to survive. PMBOK 8 is reminding you of this for a reason. If projects don't integrate into operations, the value that they created doesn't last. This section pulls everything up a level. because value isn't created by projects alone. Portfolio management decides what's worth investing in. It selects and prioritizes work based on strategy, risk, and capacity. Program management sits in the middle. It coordinates related projects so their benefits don't cancel each other out. It's focused on outcomes that only appear when the work is aligned. Project management is where the intent becomes tangible. Specific outcomes get delivered, change actually happens. And operations management is what keeps the value alive. It sustains the business day after day, long after the project team has moved on. PMBOK 8 reinforces this relationship for a reason. When these layers are disconnected, value leaks out. Good projects fail because they were never the right investment, or because their benefits were never integrated into operations. Projects don't succeed on their own. They succeed when portfolios choose wisely. Programs align outcomes. Projects deliver intentionally, and operations absorb the change. That's what PMBOK 8 keeps pointing you back to. You're not managing a project in isolation. You're operating inside a system designed or misaligned to deliver value. This is the mindset the rest of the standard assumes you already have. Section 1 isn't teaching techniques, it's repositioning you. You're not just coordinating tasks. You're enabling value to move through the organization. You're not just following guidance. You're making decisions when trade-offs collide. And you're not working in a vacuum. You're integrating people, systems, constraints, and priorities in an environment that doesn't sit still. That's why context matters. What works in one project can fail in another. And that's not a mistake, that's reality. It's why tailoring isn't optional. Applying the same approach everywhere isn't professionalism, it's avoidance. And it's why accountability stays human. Frameworks don't own outcomes. Processes don't make decisions. You do. Section 1 sets that expectation clearly. If you're looking for instructions to follow, this standard will frustrate you. If you're willing to think, adapt, and own the outcome, then this standard is for you. Here's the simplest way to think about it. Your project doesn't stand alone. It lives inside a system. Strategy, governance, operations, people, feedback, all moving at the same time. What you do in one place ripples somewhere else. Nothing is isolated. That's why PMBOK 8 reframes success. Not by what you delivered, not by when it shipped, but by whether value actually moved through the system. If the work doesn't change something that matters, the system doesn't care if you're calling your project done. Value delivery isn't a phase, it's the point. Value isn't fixed, and it isn't universal. What counts as value depends on the context you're in, who's on the other side of the work, and when you're measuring it. Delivering something doesn't guarantee value. If it isn't useful, usable, or sustained, it doesn't matter if it shipped. Different stakeholders will see value differently. That's not a problem to eliminate, that's a reality to manage. Every value decision involves trade-offs, choosing who you serve, when, and how. PMBOK 8 makes that clear for a reason. Value isn't what you finish, it's what actually lasts. Value doesn't happen by accident. It moves through a system. Strategy sets the direction, why the work exists in the first place. Governance defines the boundaries, who decides, how oversight looks, and where ethics draw the line. Portfolios, programs, and projects coordinate effort so investments don't compete or cancel each other out. Products and operations are where value has to survive after the project is over. And feedback loops are how the system learns, adapting, improving, and correcting course. PMBOK 8 is showing this to you for one reason. If any part breaks, value doesn't flow. Success isn't a finish line. PMBOK 8 challenges the idea that on time and on budget defines successful. Real success has layers: financial, operational, stakeholder. It depends on context, what the organization was actually trying to achieve. And it's measured over time, not at handoff, not in a status report. If benefits don't show up, if strategy isn't supported, if the impact didn't last, the project didn't succeed. It just ended. Your project is shaped by forces you don't control, internally and externally. And understanding them is what prevents outcomes from being accidental. Your project doesn't start on a blank page. It starts inside an environment that's already shaping it. Culture influences what gets rewarded and what gets resisted. Market forces apply pressure whether you're ready or not. Regulation sets boundaries you don't get to negotiate. Technology defines what's possible and what's risky. Economic and social conditions quietly change priorities right under your feet. These are enterprise environmental factors. You don't control them. Pretending you do is where plans break. PMBOK 8 is clear about this for a reason. Success doesn't come from fighting the environment. It comes from understanding it well enough to plan, adapt, and decide around it. Now, contrast that with what is inside the organization's control. Organizational process assets are the tools that the organization has built over time. Policies, procedures, templates, and standards, past project data, and lessons learned when they're actually used. When these assets are current and relevant, they accelerate delivery. They reduce guesswork. They prevent you from solving the same problem twice. But when they're outdated or applied blindly, they create friction. Work slows down. Decisions get boxed in. Following the process becomes more important than delivering value. PMBOK 8 isn't telling you to ignore OPAs. It's telling you to use them with judgment. They're meant to support the work and not control it. Policies, processes, and procedures are meant to guide decisions and not replace them. They standardize judgment, but they're not constraints. They're inputs. That's why tailoring isn't optional, it's expected. Using a process that doesn't fit the work isn't professional, it's avoidance. PMBOK 8 assumes you'll adapt these standards to serve the project and not control it. Organizational knowledge repositories is where experience is supposed to live. They capture what worked, what didn't, and what should never be relearned the hard way. When they're used well, they support continuous improvement. They reduce reinvention. They help decisions get better over time. When they're ignored, every project pays the same tuition again. PMBOK 8 includes this for a simple reason. Learning only creates value when it's accessible and it's applied. Organizational structures are one of the strongest forces acting on your project, whether you acknowledge it or not. In a functional structure, authority lives in departments. Decisions flow vertically. Resources are shared, but priorities compete. In a matrix structure, authority is split. In weak matrices, functional managers dominate. In balanced matrices, power is shared. In strong matrices, project leadership has more influence, but still negotiates. In a projectized structure, the authority sits with the project. Decisions move faster. Resources are dedicated, but flexibility across the organization can be limited. Hybrid structures combine elements of all of these. They're common because real organizations are complex, but they're also where confusion shows up if roles aren't clear. Structure determines who approves work, how communication flows, what resources you can realistically count on, and how quickly decisions can be made when trade-offs appear. PMBOK 8 highlights this so you can adjust your expectations early. When you understand the structure you're operating in, you stop fighting invisible constraints and start navigating them deliberately. This section acknowledges how much the work has changed. Projects don't always end when value starts anymore. In product environments, delivery is just the beginning. PMBOK 8 introduces the interaction between product, projects, and product life cycles to make that explicit. Projects often create or enhance products. Products then evolve long after the project team has stepped away. That's why long-term value matters more than short-term delivery. Shipping something that can't be sustained, improved, or supported doesn't create value, it transfers risk. This section also emphasizes coordination. Project roles and product roles can't operate in parallel lanes. They have to stay aligned on vision, priority, and outcomes. PMBOK 8 calls this out because it's increasingly relevant. Digital work, software, platforms. In these environments, success isn't finishing the project. It's setting up the product to succeed long after it does. Projects don't succeed on effort alone. They're supported by organizational functions that keep work aligned, resourced, and viable. This function keeps projects aligned with governance and strategy, ensuring decisions escalate to the right level before misalignment turns into risk. Feedback maintains alignment with stakeholders, allowing teams to adapt early rather than reacting late. Coaching, process support, and conflict resolution eliminate friction so the team can continue focusing on delivering value. This is where execution happens. Tasks are completed, deliverables are produced, and progress moves forward in meaningful increments. Projects rely on technical, business, and leadership expertise to make sound decisions when complexity increases. Strategic guidance ensures that project decisions stay aligned with enterprise priorities instead of drifting into local optimization. This is what Section 2 is ultimately anchoring you to. Projects don't exist to complete work. They exist to deliver value inside living systems. Success isn't driven by effort alone. It depends on alignment between strategy and execution, integration with product and operations, and learning fast enough to adjust before value is lost. And in that system, your role is clear. You're not just managing tasks, you're integrating value across moving parts. You're facilitating decisions when trade-offs appear. And you're stewarding change so the outcomes last beyond the project itself. Section 2 isn't adding responsibility. It's naming the responsibility that you already carry. This section changes what the standard is asking of you. PMBOK 8 isn't leading with processes, it's leading with principles. Because when the work gets unclear, steps don't help nearly as much as judgment. These principles are the behavioral core of the standard. They aren't instructions to follow. They're guides for how to decide. They act as anchors when pressure shows up, when trade-offs collide, when there isn't a rule that fits the situation you're in. And they apply everywhere. Every project, every industry, every delivery approach. PMBOK 8 is explicit about this. Principles are not steps. They don't tell you what to do next. They tell you how to think when the rules run out. This section makes the expectations explicit. You can't apply the principles mechanically. They only work if the mindset is there. PMBOK 8 is asking you to think in systems, to see how decisions ripple beyond your task list. It expects adaptability, learning as you go, adjusting without waiting for permission as reality changes. Ethical responsibility isn't optional here. Not when pressure builds, not when shortcuts are tempting. And activity is no longer the point. Outcomes are. If the work doesn't move value forward, it doesn't matter how busy it looks. That's why the role shifts. You're not just executing plans. You're making decisions under uncertainty, leading when the path isn't clear, and stewarding value so it survives the complexity around it. This mindset isn't extra. It's the baseline PMBOK 8 assumes you already bring. This section connects thinking to execution. Principles shape how you decide. Performance domains shape where the work shows up. The domains give structure. Scope, risk, governance, time, money, people, stakeholders. They show you where decisions live. But principles tell you how to act inside those spaces. They guide behavior when the domain itself isn't enough. Without principles, domains turn into checklists. You manage parts without understanding the whole. Without domains, principles stay abstract. Good intentions with nowhere to land. PMBOK 8 is clear about this balance. Structure without judgment becomes rigid. Judgment without structure becomes chaos. Real project work needs both. Thinking and execution working together at the same time. This principle asks you to stop managing in pieces. Adopting a holistic view means seeing the project inside the system it affects, not just the tasks in front of you. Every decision touches something else. Interdependencies matter. Downstream impacts will show up later whether you plan for them or not. That includes people, processes, the environment the work has to survive in. PMBOK 8 pushes against isolated optimization for a reason. Making one part look efficient can break the whole. Task-only thinking feels productive, but is how value gets lost. A holistic view keeps you from winning locally and failing systemically. This principle keeps you honest. Focusing on value means every decision runs through one question. Is this still worth doing? Value isn't something you confirm once and then move on from. It has to be validated continuously, especially when conditions change. That's why adjusting scope and priorities isn't failure here. It's responsibility. Value can shift over time. What mattered at the start might matter less now. And PMBOK 8 is clear about something uncomfortable. Not all work contributes equally to value. Being busy doesn't mean being useful. This principle gives you permission and accountability to stop doing work that no longer earns its place. This principle changes how quality is treated. Quality isn't something you check at the end. It's something you design from the start. PMBOK 8 defines quality as proactive. You prevent problems instead of having to explain them later. That means building quality into planning, into execution, into everyday decisions before defects have the chance to form. Inspection still matters, but it's not the strategy. Prevention is. And the reason is simple. Quality is what stakeholders actually experience. It's what determines whether outcomes last or fall apart after delivery. When quality is embedded, trust grows. When it's bolted on, sustainability disappears. PMBOK 8 treats quality as a leadership choice and not a final checkpoint. This principle removes the hiding places. Leadership here isn't about authority or title. It's about responsibility. Being an accountable leader means owning the outcome, especially when the path isn't clean and the answer isn't popular. Ethical conduct isn't situational. Pressure doesn't lower the bar, it raises it. Transparency matters because trust doesn't survive ambiguity. When decisions are made, people need to understand why. And PMBOK 8 is very direct about this. Accountability doesn't belong to a process. It doesn't live in a framework. It stays human with the person who makes the call. This principle recognizes something that most plans ignore. How the team feels determines how the work goes. An empowered culture isn't about motivational posters. It's about psychological safety. Whether people can speak up before problems become expensive. Collaboration matters because complex work can't be solved alone. Shared ownership keeps success and failure from landing on one person. When teams feel safe and invested, decisions get better. Risk surfaces earlier. Performance lasts instead of burning out. PMBOK 8 includes this because culture isn't a soft issue. It's a performance multiplier or a silent constraint. This principle widens the time horizon. Sustainability here isn't just environmental. It's economic, social, environmental, all at once. It asks you to think beyond delivery and consider what the project leaves behind. Long-term thinking matters because short wins can create lasting damage. Unintended consequences don't show up in schedules. They show up later, in operations and trust. PMBOK 8 treats sustainability as a decision lens, not a separate initiative, not an extra checklist. Every choice you make either supports the future or quietly mortgages it. This is what Section 3 ultimately locks in on. The environment will keep changing. Tools will evolve. Processes will fall short. Principles are what stays stable. They act as anchors when conditions shift and guides when there isn't a process that fits cleanly. PMBOK 8 is making one thing explicit here. How you make decisions matters just as much as what you deliver. Outcomes don't exist without judgment behind them. And this section is setting you up for what comes next. The performance domains, tailoring, and context-driven application. From here on out, the standard assumes you're not looking for instructions. You're preparing to decide well when it actually counts. This section is how work actually moves through time. Project life cycles exist to organize the work, manage uncertainty, and control risk as conditions change. They're not there to force structure for structure's sake. They're there to give you enough shape to make decisions before risk gets expensive. PMBOK 8 is clear about something that used to be implied. There is no single life cycle that fits every project. Using the same one everywhere isn't consistency, it's avoidance. Life cycles have to match context, the uncertainty you're facing, the value you're trying to protect, and how much risk the organization is willing to carry. This section isn't asking you to choose a model. It's asking you to choose one intentionally. Phases are how you break complexity into something manageable. They group related work together so progress can be seen, decisions can be made, and risk can be addressed before it compounds. Each phase creates a moment to pause, to review, to decide whether moving forward still makes sense. That's how phases reduce risk, through progressive validation and not blind momentum. And they don't all look the same. Some phases are sequential, some are iterative, and some overlap because waiting would create more risk than moving. PMBOK 8 is explicit about this. Phase structure should reflect reality, how much uncertainty you're facing, where the risk actually lives, and how complex the work truly is. Phases aren't about control. They're about giving you better moments to decide. This section clears up a common misunderstanding. Development approaches describe how work is planned and delivered, and not what kind of professional you are. They're not methodologies you commit to forever. They're not maturity rankings that say one way is better than the other. They're choices based on the work in front of you, the uncertainty you're dealing with, and the value you're trying to protect. PMBOK 8 reframes this on purpose. The question isn't which approach do you use, it's which approach fits the situation right now. That's the level of judgment that this section is asking for. Predictive works when certainty is high. Requirements are stable. You can plan most of the work up front because change is expensive later. Execution follows a sequence. One phase feeds the next. Decisions are made early to reduce surprises downstream. This approach fits best when uncertainty is low, when the cost of change is high, and when regulatory or compliance constraints leave little room to adapt midstream. PMBOK 8 isn't positioning predictive as outdated. It's positioning it as precise when the conditions are right. Adaptive exists for work that can't be entirely known from the start. Requirements evolve because learning is part of the job. Value shows up in increments and not all at once. Delivery is iterative. You build, learn, adjust, and build again. Feedback isn't a checkpoint, it's the engine. This approach fits when uncertainty is high, when discovery matters more than prediction, when innovation requires room to change direction. PMBOK 8 frames adaptive as intentional, not less disciplined, just disciplined in a different way. Hybrid exists because most real work doesn't fit clean labels. Some parts need certainty, others need flexibility. Hybrid combines predictive structure where change is costly with adaptive delivery where learning is essential. It's tailored to constraints, regulatory, financial, organizational, without sacrificing responsiveness. That's why it's common in large enterprises, in transformation initiatives, and in environments where risk isn't uniform. PMBOK 8 treats hybrid not as a compromise, but as a deliberate design choice for complex reality. This section makes the responsibility explicit. Choosing a development approach isn't something you inherit, it's something you decide. Defaulting to whatever an organization usually does is still a decision, just an unexamined one. PMBOK 8 emphasizes this because the delivery approach shapes everything. Risk exposure, feedback timing, how fast value shows up. Selecting an approach is a leadership moment. It's where you pause, assess the work, and choose intentionally instead of automatically. This section starts with the work itself. How clear are the deliverables really? Are the requirements stable or still taking shape? If change is rare and clarity is high, then predictive approach makes sense. If change is frequent and understanding evolves, adaptive or hybrid approaches protect value. Acceptance criteria matters just as much. When they're mature, decisions can be made early. When they aren't, learning has to be built into delivery. PMBOK 8 is asking you to look honestly at the deliverables. Not how you wish they behaved, but how they actually do. Then you take a look at the project itself. How much uncertainty are you actually carrying? What's the risk profile if things change late? How complex are the dependencies, and how tightly coupled is the work? And just as important, how involved do stakeholders need to be for alignment to stay real? High uncertainty, high dependency, and constant stakeholder input pushes you towards adaptive and hybrid approaches. Lower uncertainty, contained risk, and predictable involvement supports a more predictive approach. PMBOK 8 is reminding you that the project's reality, not preference or habit, should drive how you deliver it. This part of the decision is about the organization you're actually working in, not the one the framework assumes. Culture matters. How change is received, how much disruption is tolerated, and how quickly people adapt when things shift. Governance expectations matter too. Some organizations require tight oversight and formal approvals. Others operate with trust and distributed decision-making. Ignoring that reality creates friction fast. Capability and maturity shape what's realistic. A highly experienced team can handle flexibility. A less mature environment may require more structure to stay aligned. And existing operating models matter. How work already flows, how products, projects, and operations interact, and where decisions are normally made. PMBOK 8 is clear here. You don't choose an approach in isolation. You choose it to fit the organization you're already inside, or you spend the project fighting the system instead of delivering value. Delivery cadence is about when value actually shows up. It's the timing and frequency of delivery, how often stakeholders see progress that actually matters. Cadence shapes engagement. Frequent delivery keeps attention and trust alive. Long gaps increase risk and assumptions. It also shapes feedback quality. The sooner value is visible, the sooner learning happens, and it directly affects risk exposure. Longer cycles hide problems. Shorter cycles surface them while you still have options. Cadence doesn't have to look one way. It can be fixed, flexible, or triggered by events instead of calendars. PMBOK 8 includes cadence because timing isn't neutral. How often you deliver changes how safely you can learn. This section corrects a long-standing assumption. The traditional process groups are back, but they aren't steps. They're focus areas. Work states you move in and out of as the project evolves. You don't finish one before you start the next. You initiate while executing. You plan while monitoring. You begin closing before everything's complete. PMBOK 8 makes this explicit because real work is messy. Linear models break down under uncertainty. These focus areas exist to guide attention, not to prescribe sequence. They move with the work, not ahead of it. Initiating is about legitimacy and alignment. This is where the work is authorized and aligned to strategy and not just approved to begin. It's also where stakeholders are identified early, before assumptions harden and influence goes unnoticed. Initiating isn't a kickoff meeting. It's the moment an organization says, this work is important enough to invest in and we're clear on why. Planning is where intention takes shape. This is where you define the approach, how the work will be delivered, and not just what will be delivered. It's where expectations are made explicit, what success looks like, how progress will be judged, and it's where you prepare for uncertainty instead of pretending it doesn't exist. You plan knowing things will change, so adjustment doesn't feel like failure later. In PMBOK 8, planning isn't about locking things down. It's about being ready to decide when reality shifts. Executing is where intent turns into action. The work gets done. Deliverables start to exist. Progress becomes visible. But execution isn't just task completion. It's managing teams, communication, and energy while decisions are tested in real time. This is where plans meet reality. PMBOK 8 treats executing as dynamic, not something you do once the thinking is over, but something that constantly informs the next decision. Monitoring and controlling is about staying oriented. You track performance so reality stays visible and not hidden behind optimism. You manage change so adjustments are intentional and not reactive. And you maintain alignment with strategy, stakeholders, and value as conditions shift. In PMBOK 8, this isn't about policing work. It's about keeping the project pointed where it's supposed to go. Closing is where the work is allowed to stand on its own. Formal acceptance confirms the outcome is complete and fit for its purpose. Transition to operations ensures the value survives after the project team steps away. And knowledge capture turns experience into learning, so effort isn't lost once the work ends. PMBOK 8 treats closing as intentional, not as an administrative step, but the moment that value becomes durable. Taken together, these focus areas never stop moving. They occur throughout the life of the project, not in sequence and not once. They interact continuously. What you learn while executing reshapes planning. What you see while monitoring informs initiation and closure decisions. And they're adjusted through tailoring, applied with more or less rigor depending on risk, complexity, and context. PMBOK 8 isn't giving you a flowchart. It's giving you a way to stay oriented while the work keeps changing. This is what Section 4 ultimately grounds you in. Life cycles and development approaches aren't ideals. They have to match reality as it actually exists. Structure isn't there to eliminate uncertainty. It's there to help you manage it before it turns into risk. That's why your role shifts again here. You're not just following a delivery model. You're designing how the work will move through uncertainty. And you're deciding which approach fits and not inheriting one by default. Section 4 sets you up for what comes next. Performance domains, processes, and execution that's intentionally tailored to the work in front of you. From here on out, the standard assumes you're choosing and not just executing. Up to this point, the standard has been about how to think. Principles, value, judgment. Now the book shifts. The guide doesn't change the standard, it supports it. This is where PMI shows you what you might use. Models, methods, artifacts, without telling you what you must do. It's a toolbox, not a rule book. Tools serve decisions and not compliance. The thinking comes first. Context decides the rest. This is where execution gets its shape, and PMBOK 8 draws a clear line from the past. PMBOK 8 uses 7 integrated performance domains because work doesn't happen in isolation. Each domain gives you an execution architecture, key concepts to orient you, processes you can draw from without being forced to follow, tailoring considerations so context stays in control, interactions that acknowledge nothing works alone, and outcome checks to keep value visible. Performance domains aren't phases. You don't move through them in order. They're areas of focus that stay active together. This is also where PMI makes its intent unmistakable. There are 40 processes, but none of them are mandatory. Not because they're unimportant, but because blind compliance was never the goal. These processes are reference tools, not requirements. Not proof that you did it right. They're meant to be used with judgment. You can combine them when separation adds no value. You can simplify them when complexity doesn't demand rigor. And you can omit them entirely if they don't serve the work that's in front of you. What matters is why you're using them. Their value depends on the reality you're in, how complex the work actually is, how much risk you're carrying, the delivery approach you're working within, and the maturity of the organization that you're operating inside. This is where the guide steps in. It doesn't tell you what to do. It shows you options, models, methods, and artifacts you might use to support each domain. The domains define where your attention belongs. The guide gives you ways to support it. PMBOK 8 isn't trying to standardize behavior. It's trying to standardize thinking. Use what helps you decide better and let go of what doesn't. Here's the simplest way to hold it in your head. PMBOK 8 doesn't measure you by how many processes you use. It measures you by how well you decide when it actually matters. The first domain sets the tone for everything else. This is where projects either stay aligned or drift. Governance isn't about control, it's about clarity. Who has the right to decide when trade-offs show up? Where issues go if they can't be resolved at the team level? What gets measured so progress is visible and not assumed? And how ethical conduct is maintained when pressure builds. Without decision rights, everything stalls. Without escalation paths, risks fester. Without meaningful metrics, status becomes storytelling. And without ethics, short-term wins can create long-term damage. The processes here aren't heavy, they're foundational. You establish governance structures so decisions don't depend on personalities. You monitor alignment so strategy and execution don't separate. And you enable transparency so problems surface early when they're still manageable. This is also where the guide steps in. It supports the domain with governance models that clarify authority and accountability, decision frameworks that help navigate tough calls, oversight and escalation mechanisms that keep issues from going underground, methods for monitoring governance health, and artifacts that makes transparency and reporting real. PMBOK 8 treats governance as a support system. When it's working, the project moves faster. When it's missing, everything else feels harder than it should. This is what governance looks like when it's done deliberately. Authorizing the project isn't just paperwork. It's the moment the organization says, yes, this matters enough to begin. Without that clarity, everything that follows feels fragile. The project charter sets the frame, why this exists, and what success looks like. And just as important, what's out of bounds. Engaging sponsors isn't just about status updates. It's about securing real ownership. Someone with the authority to decide, protect the work, and remove obstacles when progress slows. Defining the governance structure makes decisions survivable. Who decides what? Where issues escalate? What controls exist to prevent drift without choking momentum? Monitoring governance effectiveness keeps it honest. If governance starts slowing value instead of enabling it, it needs to change. Ethical conduct isn't optional when pressure shows up. Transparency and integrity are what keep short-term wins from creating lasting damage. And alignment with strategy is never a one-time check. As priorities shift, the question has to be asked again. Does this still deserve the organization's time and resources? PMBOK 8 treats governance as living. When it's working, decisions move faster. And when it isn't, no amount of execution can compensate. The scope performance domain is where value either becomes clear or gets diluted. This domain isn't about listing everything you could do. It's about deciding what actually matters. Requirements are signals. They tell you what someone needs, not automatically what to build. Deliverables are commitments. They're what you agree will exist at the end and not what you hope will. And the distinction between project scope and product scope matters more than you think. Product scope is about features and capabilities. Project scope is about the work required to deliver them. Mix those up and confusion shows up fast. The processes here exist to protect focus. You define scope so effort has direction. You validate scope so what's delivered matches what was intended. And you control changes so every adjustment is intentional and not reactive. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers ways to represent requirements and outcomes clearly. Models that help decompose scope without losing intent. Methods for eliciting and validating requirements. And artifacts that communicate scope so that everybody stays aligned. PMBOK 8 isn't trying to stop change. It's making sure that change doesn't erase the value that you started the project to deliver. This is where value either stays sharp or slowly starts to blur. Collecting requirements isn't about capturing every request. It's about listening for what the stakeholders actually need and not what they ask for first. Defining scope is where intent becomes commitment. You translate those needs into clear outcomes and deliverables so effort has a target and not just momentum. Decomposing the work makes the work survivable. Whether it's a work breakdown structure or a backlog, this is how complexity becomes manageable. Validating scope is a conversation and not a sign-off. It's where you confirm what was delivered matches what was meant before assumptions harden into disappointment. Controlling scope doesn't mean resisting change. It means making change visible. Every adjustment has a cost, and this is where you decide if it's worth paying. And refining scope through learning is what keeps adaptive work honest. As understanding improves, scope should evolve with it. Freezing learning in the name of certainty is how value gets lost. PMBOK 8 treats scope as dynamic. If it isn't actively being shaped, it's being shaped for you and usually by accident. The schedule performance domain reframes how time is treated. Schedule in PMBOK 8 isn't about dates on a calendar. It's about how time is used to deliver value. Sequencing is simply order. What has to happen before something else is allowed to begin? Cadence is rhythm. How often progress is visible. How often learning shows up. And then there's the tension most projects live in. Flow versus deadlines. Deadlines create urgency. Flow creates sustainability. Good schedule thinking knows when to lean on each. The processes here are light by design. You plan the schedule to create shared expectations. You estimate durations to reduce surprises and not to predict perfectly. And you control progress so that reality shows up early while you still have options. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers time-based planning and flow models, methods for sequencing and forecasting, scheduling and flow models that fit different contexts, estimation and tracking methods that reflect uncertainty, and artifacts that visualize progress and cadence clearly. PMBOK 8 treats time as something to manage thoughtfully, not a weapon that's used to force progress before it's ready to happen. This domain is where time stops being abstract. Defining activities is about clarity. You identify the actual work required to turn intent into deliverables. Not vague effort, real actions. Sequencing activities creates logic. What has to happen first? What can happen in parallel? Where dependencies will slow you down if you ignore them. Estimating durations isn't about precision. It's about realism. You forecast time with uncertainty in mind and not wishful thinking. Developing the schedule pulls it all together. Timing, cadence, expectations. Shared understanding of how progress should feel over time. Controlling the schedule keeps you in reality. You track progress so delays surface early while there's still time to adjust. And optimizing flow is where modern thinking shows up. You reduce bottlenecks. You smooth handoffs. You protect momentum so value moves instead of piling up. PMBOK 8 treats time as something to be shaped, not something to chase after once it's already gone. All of it serves one purpose: managing time so value keeps moving, not just so deadlines look good on paper. The finance performance domain is where projects stop being ideas and start being investments. This domain isn't about spreadsheets, it's about stewardship. Cost tells you what the work consumes. Funding determines what's actually possible. Benefits explain why the investment exists in the first place. Investment thinking changes the conversation. You're not just spending money. You're deciding whether the return justifies the effort. And life cycle cost keeps you honest. What it takes to build something is rarely the full story. What it takes to operate it, support it, and sustain it often matters much more. The processes here exist to keep the clarity intact. You estimate costs to understand the commitment you're making. You manage budgets to stay aligned with reality as it changes. And you monitor financial performance to determine whether the investment is still paying off. This is where the guide supports the domain. It provides investment and cost models, methods for budgeting and financial control, cost and funding models that fit different contexts, financial performance methods that track value over time, and artifacts that support real financial decision-making. PMBOK 8 treats money as a signal. When the numbers stop making sense, it's not a finance problem, it's a decision problem. This domain exists to keep projects grounded in reality by ensuring financial stewardship and investment viability. Estimating costs is about understanding the commitment you're asking the organization to make. Not just money, but resources, time, and attention. Determining the budget turns that estimate into a boundary. It's the point where intent becomes an authorized investment. Managing funding keeps the project alive. Funds are secured and released in a way that matches progress and not hope. Controlling costs isn't about restriction. It's about visibility. Seeing variances early while decisions still matter. Evaluating financial performance is where honesty shows up. Is the return real? Are the benefits materializing? Or is the value still theoretical? And supporting investment decisions is the most overlooked part. This is where you inform whether the work should continue, pivot, or stop. Ending a project at the right time is often the most responsible decision. PMBOK 8 treats finance as stewardship. If the investment no longer makes sense, the process exists to help you say so clearly and responsibly. The stakeholder performance domain exists because projects don't fail in silence. They fail when alignment erodes. Influence matters, whether it's formal or not. The person who can block progress doesn't always have the title. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it show up later as resistance. Engagement is about presence and not volume. It's about knowing who needs to be involved, when they need to be involved, and how deeply. Too little engagement creates surprises. Too much engagement creates noise. And communication isn't about updates. It's about meaning. What changed? why it matters, and what it means to them. The processes here exist to protect trust. You identify stakeholders so no one critical stays invisible. You plan engagement so involvement is intentional and not reactive. And you manage expectations so delivery doesn't come as a shock. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers influence and communication models, methods for engagement and feedback, stakeholder analysis models to surface power and interest, and artifacts that track expectations and relationships over time. PMBOK 8 treats stakeholder work as continuous. Trust isn't built at kickoff. It's maintained decision by decision. This domain exists because no amount of execution can compensate for loss of trust. The purpose here isn't just communication, it's alignment, shared understanding, and the kind of trust that survives change, pressure, and bad news. Identifying stakeholders is about visibility. Who is impacted? Who has influence? Who can quietly block progress if ignored? Analyzing stakeholder needs goes deeper. It's not just what they want, it's what they care about, how much power they hold, and what success actually means to them. Planning stakeholder engagement makes involvement intentional. Who needs to be closely involved? Who needs regular context? Who only needs outcomes? This is where over-communication and under-communication both get corrected. Managing stakeholder engagement is where relationships are built. Concerns are surfaced early. Expectations are recalibrated before they turn into resistance. And monitoring stakeholder relationships keeps alignment alive. As the project changes, people's needs change with it. Engagement has to adapt or trust erodes. PMBOK 8 treats stakeholders as active participants and not an audience. When trust is maintained, problems get discussed early. When it isn't, they show up late when options are limited. The resources performance domain exists for one simple reason. Projects don't deliver value, people do. Teams aren't just a collection of roles, they're relationships. And trust, clarity, and understanding determines how much capability is actually going to show up. Leadership here isn't positional, it's situational. Knowing when to direct, when to support, and when to get out of the way. Capability is more than skill. It's whether the environment allows people to use what they know. Burned out teams don't perform better with better plans. The processes support that reality. You acquire resources so the work is possible at all. You develop teams so that performance improves instead of plateaus. And you manage performance so issues surface early before frustration turns into disengagement. This is where the guide supports the domain. It provides team and leadership models, capability and capacity methods, organizational and team models that reflect real structures, resource planning and development methods, and artifacts that support staffing, growth, and performance. PMBOK 8 treats resource management as human work. If the people aren't supported, nothing else holds together. This domain exists to make sure effort turns into performance. The purpose isn't just staffing. It's creating the conditions where people and assets can actually do their best work. Planning resource management is about foresight, what skills are needed, when they're needed, and where gaps will create risk if ignored. Acquiring resources turns plans into reality. Securing the right people, tools, facilities, and materials, so progress doesn't stall waiting for access. Developing the team is where capability compounds, skills grow, trust forms, collaboration replaces friction. Managing team performance keeps energy focused in the right direction. Accountability stays clear. Motivation is maintained. Conflict is addressed before it hardens into disengagement. And optimizing resource utilization is about balance. Workload that's too heavy burns people out. Too light and momentum disappears. Capability only matters if it's usable. PMBOK 8 treats resources as more than inputs. When people are supported and aligned, performance becomes sustainable and not accidental. The risk performance domain exists because uncertainty is unavoidable. Risk isn't just what could go wrong. It's also what could go right if you're paying attention. Threats are the obvious part, but opportunities are the ones that disappear if nobody's watching. Risk appetite matters here. not what's written in policy, but what the organization actually tolerates when decisions get uncomfortable. And resilience is what shows up when things don't go according to plan. Not panic, not blame, the ability to absorb impact and keep moving. The processes are intentionally simple. You identify risks, so surprises have names. You analyze risks, so attention goes where it matters the most. And you respond and monitor, so uncertainty stays visible instead of turning into crisis. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers risk and uncertainty models, methods for analysis and response, threat and opportunity models that balance caution with upside, and artifacts that track and communicate risk clearly. PMBOK 8 doesn't promise safety. It helps you stay deliberate when certainty disappears. This domain exists because uncertainty doesn't wait for permission. The purpose isn't to eliminate risk. It's to stay ahead of it on purpose. Identifying risks is about awareness. You name the sources of uncertainty so surprises don't stay invisible. Analyzing risk brings focus. You assess likelihood and impact so attention goes where it actually matters, and not where anxiety is the loudest. Planning risk responses turns concern into action. You decide how to reduce threats and take advantage of opportunities that others might miss. Implementing risk responses is where intent becomes real. Mitigation isn't helpful if it stays theoretical. Opportunities don't create value if no one acts on them. And monitoring risk keeps uncertainty visible over time. Some risks fade and new ones emerge. Staying alert is how resilience is built. PMBOK 8 treats risk as a leadership responsibility. You're not rewarded for avoiding uncertainty. You're trusted to navigate it deliberately. This is the through line the guide keeps reinforcing. The performance domains tell you where your attention needs to be. They don't tell you exactly what to do. That's where the guide comes in. It shows you ways the domains may be supported, models you could use, methods you might apply, artifacts that can help decisions land. Nothing here is required and nothing maps one-to-one. One artifact can support multiple domains. One domain can be supported in many different ways. That's intentional. It aligns with what the standard has been saying all along. Judgment matters more than compliance. Tailoring matters more than uniformity. And value matters more than visible activity. The guide doesn't replace thinking. It supports it when you use it on purpose. This section makes something explicit that used to be implied. Tailoring isn't optional. It's a core skill. No two projects are the same. Different risks, different constraints, different stakes. Using the same approach everywhere doesn't create consistency. It increases risk. That's why PMBOK 8 positions tailoring as leadership work. It requires judgment, it requires awareness, and it requires owning the outcome. Tailoring is how standards turn into value, not by following more steps, but by choosing what actually fits the work in front of you. Tailoring is necessary because the work is never identical. Projects differ by complexity, by context, by risk and uncertainty, and by what stakeholders actually expect and not what the template assumes. When you standardize without tailoring, the cost shows up fast. Overhead increases, value gets missed, and confidence becomes false because the plan looks solid while reality drifts. Tailoring brings the work back into focus. It ensures the approach fits the purpose. That effort goes where it matters the most. And that structure supports delivery instead of getting in the way. PMBOK 8 treats tailoring as how you respect reality and not how you escape discipline. Tailoring doesn't live in one corner of the project. It applies across the entire system. You can tailor the life cycle, how phases are structured, where they overlap, and where decisions are intentionally paused. You tailor the development approach, predictive when certainty is high, adaptive when learning is required, hybrid or product-centric when reality demands both. Governance rigor is also a choice. How much oversight is needed? Who has authority to decide? Where issues escalate? And how often reporting actually adds value? Each performance domain can be tuned. More formality when risk is high, Less where simplicity works, deeper analysis where consequences matter, clearer interaction where dependencies exist. Processes are selected deliberately. You use the ones that help. You combine or simplify when overlap adds no value. And you leave out what only creates noise. Models, methods, and artifacts are also tailored too. Which tools you use, how detailed they need to be, and how long they exist before they outlive their usefulness. Even stakeholder engagement is shaped intentionally. How deep involvement needs to be, how often communication actually helps, and how feedback is gathered and acted on. PMBOK 8 is clear about this. Tailoring isn't trimming around the edges. It's designing how the work actually happens. Tailoring decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They're shaped by the reality that you're operating in. Project size and complexity matters. What works for a small contained effort breaks under scale. Risk profile matters. Higher risk demands more rigor. Lower risk allows a lighter touch. Uncertainty matters. When learning is required, flexibility has to be built in. Regulatory and compliance needs matter. Some constraints are non-negotiable, and tailoring has to respect that. Organizational maturity matters. The same approach can empower one organization and overwhelm another. Team capability matters. Plans don't deliver value, people do. And stakeholder tolerance for change matters. Pushing faster than trust allows creates resistance and not progress. PMBOK 8 treats these factors as signals. They tell you how much structure the work actually needs, not how much structure you're used to applying. Tailoring isn't something you lock in at the start. It's continuous. What fits today may not fit 3 months from now. And pretending otherwise is how misalignment creeps in. That's why tailoring has to be reviewed regularly. Not as a formality, but as a real check against reality. When risk changes, the approach may need more rigor. When scope shifts, priority needs to be reset. When stakeholders change, engagement has to adjust. And when strategy moves, execution has to follow. PMBOK 8 treats retailoring as a strength. It's how you stay aligned as conditions evolve, instead of defending decisions that no longer serve the work. This is where tailoring becomes personal. No framework can make these decisions for you. Tailoring relies on experience, what you've seen work and what you've seen fail. It relies on situational awareness, reading the room, the risks, and the signals that the plan doesn't capture. And it relies on ethical responsibility, especially when shortcuts are tempting and consequences aren't immediate. PMBOK 8 is direct about this. Frameworks don't make decisions, people do. And that means accountability for tailoring choices doesn't sit in the process. It stays with you. PMBOK 8 also implicitly tells you what tailoring is not. Using every process just in case isn't rigor. It's fear disguised as thoroughness. Treating tailoring as permission to skip thinking isn't flexibility, it's negligence. Confusing tailoring with lack of discipline misses the point entirely. Discipline is choosing what fits and holding the line. And applying organizational standards without context turns good intentions into friction. These anti-patterns all have one thing in common. They avoid judgment. PMBOK 8 doesn't give you tailoring to escape responsibility. It gives it to you because responsibility can't be automated. This is the point PMBOK 8 keeps circling back to. Tailoring is intentional, and you choose it on purpose. It's driven by context, not habit, not templates, not what worked last time. And it's anchored in value. If it doesn't help deliver value, it doesn't belong. That's why the role shifts again here. You're not just executing a plan. You're designing how the work gets done, adapting as reality changes, deciding what fits and what doesn't. This aligns perfectly with PMBOK 8's core philosophy. Judgment over compliance. Fit over uniformity. Value over activity. Tailoring is how that philosophy shows up in the real work. This section changes how a lot of people think about project work. In PMBOK 8, inputs and outputs are not mechanical steps. They're information flows. They exist to help you decide and not to prove you followed a process. Inputs and outputs are contextual by design. They support value delivery and not documentation for its own sake. That's why PMBOK 8 moves away from traditional ITTOs. There's no one-to-one mapping anymore. No mandatory set of inputs and outputs per process. Flexibility matters more than prescription. Judgment matters more than rote application. The same input can support multiple activities, and outputs don't have to be permanent, polished, or exhaustive. Some are temporary, some evolve, some are intentionally minimal. Inputs represent what you know right now. They're information, constraints, and resources that shape decisions. Strategic direction, governance boundaries, stakeholder needs, organizational assets, and environmental factors. And what you've already learned. Outputs represent what enables the next move. They help alignment stay real. They make decisions visible. They show whether value is actually being realized. Sometimes that's an artifact. Sometimes it's a decision. Sometimes it's a shared understanding. If it supports action, it counts. And if it doesn't need to exist. Inputs and outputs don't live in silos. They flow across performance domains because domains interact continuously. From there, tailoring takes over. Project size, risk, uncertainty, regulatory needs, stakeholder expectations, organizational maturity. Outputs can be combined, simplified, or omitted entirely if they don't bring value. There's no fixed set per domain, and that's intentional. The guide supports this by offering examples, common inputs, common outputs, illustrations of how information might flow, not requirements, starting points. PMBOK 8 also implicitly warns you about the traps. Producing outputs because the process says so, treating documentation as evidence of progress, creating artifacts no one uses, assuming more outputs means more control. They don't. Here's the core intent. Inputs and outputs exist to support thinking and decisions. They are not measures of professionalism. This aligns with the standard all the way through. Judgment over compliance, fit over completeness, value over visible activity. If an input helps you decide better, keep it. If an output helps the work move forward, create it. Everything else is just noise. This section finishes the shift that PMBOK 8 has been making all along. Tools and techniques are not compliance mechanisms, they're decision support. They exist to help you think, not to replace judgment and not to prove professionalism. No tool is mandatory and no technique guarantees success. What matters is alignment with the principles, with the performance domains, and with how you've tailored the work. PMBOK 8 groups tools and techniques conceptually and not prescriptively. Some help you analyze and decide, weighing trade-offs, reducing uncertainty, comparing options. Some help you plan and structure work, creating shared understanding around scope, schedule, resources, and cost. Some help you estimate and forecast, not to predict perfectly, but to reduce surprises and to learn fast. Some focus on communication and engagement, building alignment, managing expectations, and enabling feedback based on who's involved and what they actually need. Others support teams and leadership, collaboration, conflict resolution, performance, with emphasis on psychological safety and shared ownership. And some exist to monitor and control, to make progress visible, to detect deviation early, with insight as the goal and not surveillance. That's why tools and techniques live in the guide and not the standard. The standard tells you how to think. The guide offers things you might use. Tools don't define competence. Outcomes do. None of these tools belong to just one domain. The same technique can support governance, scope, risk, or stakeholders. Domains tell where attention is required. Tools help with how that attention is supported. And all of it is tailored. Project size, risk, uncertainty, organizational maturity, team capability. Tools can be combined, simplified, or discarded entirely if they stop being useful. Over-tooling isn't rigor in PMBOK 8. It's risk. Here's the core intent. Tools serve decisions. Techniques support judgment. Fit matters more than completeness. Usefulness matters more than tradition. This aligns perfectly with the philosophy you've seen throughout the book. Judgment over compliance. Value over visible activity. If a tool helps you decide better, use it. If it doesn't, you're trusted to let it go. These appendices don't exist to add rules. They add context, so you understand why the standard looks as it does. They add clarity, so concepts aren't applied blindly or out of habit. And they add confidence, so you can apply PMBOK 8 thoughtfully without needing permission from a checklist. They don't change the standard, they support your judgment. And that's exactly how PMI intends for them to be used. Appendix X1 exists for one reason, and that's transparency. It shows you who shaped PMBOK 8. Practitioners, reviewers, and experts from across industries, regions, and delivery environments. This isn't a single methodology or a narrow point of view. It's intentionally global and diverse and grounded in how work actually happens. Appendix X1 is PMI showing its work, so you can trust that what you're applying was built from real practice and not theory alone. Appendix X2 shifts how PMOs are meant to be understood. Its purpose isn't to tell you how to build a PMO. It's to explain how a PMO should support value delivery. PMBOK 8 reframes the PMO from an administrative function to a value-enabling structure. This appendix walks through the PMO value proposition. It introduces customer-centric PMO thinking. It explores different PMO types, models, and structures. And it explains how PMOs evolve through maturity and not overnight. The message is clear. There is no single right PMO. PMOs should be tailored to the organization they serve. They should change as strategy changes. And they should exist to enable decision-making, alignment, and value delivery, not to enforce uniform process or act as a compliance gate. Appendix X3 deserves more time, and that's intentional. This explanation is longer and more detailed than the others because AI is not just another topic. It's a shift in how the work happens. PMBOK 8 is very clear on how AI is positioned. AI is a project context and not a methodology. It changes the environment that projects operate in, not the responsibility of the people who are running them. It's also an enabler and not a replacement for project management. AI can increase speed. It can expand analytical capability. It can surface patterns that humans might miss, but it doesn't replace judgment. It doesn't own decisions, and it doesn't carry accountability. Those stay human. PMI places AI in an appendix for a reason. AI is advancing too fast for prescriptive guidance to stay relevant. Specific tools will change. Platforms will come and go. Capabilities will expand. Principles, on the other hand, will need to remain stable. That's the line PMBOK 8 draws. Use AI where it adds value. Govern it thoughtfully. Apply ethical responsibility deliberately. AI can accelerate how decisions are made, but it can't replace the responsibility for making them. That's why this appendix matters. To understand Appendix X3, you have to start with how PMI frames AI in project work. AI intersects with projects in three places at once. It shows up in the work itself, how information is analyzed, how plans are created, and how execution is supported. It shows up in decision-making by accelerating analysis, surfacing patterns, and expanding what's possible with the data you already have. And it shows up in delivery environments, changing how teams collaborate, how work is coordinated, and how quickly expectations evolve. PMBOK 8 is careful about what AI is and isn't. AI can assist in planning, analysis, and execution. It can automate repetitive or data-heavy tasks. It can reduce manual effort and increase speed, but it does not eliminate uncertainty. In fact, it introduces new forms of it, new dependencies on data quality, new risks tied to bias, opacity, and misuse, new governance needs around oversight, accountability, and ethics. PMI's message here is deliberate. AI changes how projects operate. It does not remove the need for judgment. It increases the importance of it. PMBOK 8 is deliberate about how AI should be adopted. Not fast, not everywhere, and never just because it's available. Responsible AI adoption starts with alignment. Does this use of AI support organizational strategy, or is it a solution looking for a problem? Readiness matters just as much. Data quality, process maturity, cultural acceptance. Without those, AI amplifies noise instead of insight. That's why PMI emphasizes incremental adoption. Small experiments, contained use cases, learning before scale. Big bang implementations create more risk than value, especially when ownership is unclear. And ownership must be explicit. Someone has to be accountable for outcomes. Someone has to own the decision to use AI. And someone has to intervene when results don't make sense. This is where the project professional plays a critical role. You evaluate where AI actually adds value. You decide when automation helps and when it hides risk. And you prevent solution-first thinking that skips the problem entirely. PMBOK 8 doesn't treat AI adoption as a technical decision. It treats it as a leadership one. PMBOK 8 also grounds this discussion in reality. The AI market is moving fast. Capabilities are advancing rapidly. And access to AI tools has never been easier. That combination creates opportunity and risk. Vendors are multiplying, solutions are proliferating, and promises are getting louder. Not every tool is mature, and not every claim is realistic. Not every outcome is achievable just because a demo looked impressive. That's why PMI calls out market volatility explicitly. The pace of change means today's best option might be obsolete tomorrow. And early adoption without scrutiny can lock organizations into fragile dependency. The response PMBOK 8 recommends isn't resistance. It's skepticism, due diligence, and continuous learning. Question assumptions. Validate claims. Understand limitations. AI literacy isn't optional anymore, but neither is discernment. PMBOK 8 isn't asking you to chase the market. It's asking you to stay grounded while the market keeps moving. PMBOK 8 keeps the conversation practical by calling out where AI is most commonly used in project work. One area is data analysis and forecasting. AI can process large volumes of data faster than any human team and surface trends that would otherwise stay hidden. Another is pattern recognition. Spotting correlations, identifying anomalies, highlighting risks or opportunities faster than traditional analysis might. And then there's automation. Routine, repetitive, data-heavy tasks that consume time without adding proportional value. In all of these cases, the intent is the same. AI augments human capability. It expands what you can see. It accelerates how quickly insights appear. But it does not own the outcome. Final decisions remain human-owned. Accountability doesn't transfer to a model. And responsibility doesn't disappear because an algorithm was involved. That's why PMI reinforces one more filter here. Every AI use case has to be evaluated for value, for risk, and for ethics. If it doesn't improve outcomes, if it introduces unacceptable risk, or if it compromises trust, then speed alone isn't a justification. PMBOK 8 treats AI as a powerful assistant and not the one in charge. This is where PMI draws the firmest line. Ethics in AI use are not optional. They're non-negotiable because AI doesn't operate in a vacuum. It reflects the data it's trained on, the assumptions behind it, and the incentives around how it's used. PMBOK 8 calls out the risks directly. Bias and fairness, when outputs disadvantage certain groups without anyone noticing. Transparency and explainability, when decisions can't be understood or questioned. Data privacy and security, when sensitive information is exposed, reused, or misapplied. And accountability, who owns the outcome when AI-supported decisions cause harm. The last one matters the most, because responsibility doesn't belong to the tool. It belongs to the organization and the people making the decision. That's why governance is central here. Clear decision authority, defined oversight mechanisms, alignment with organizational values and codes of conduct. AI use has to fit inside these boundaries and not operate around them. PMBOK 8 is explicit about this. Ethical responsibility cannot be delegated. You can automate analysis or insight, but accountability stays human every time. PMBOK 8 closes the AI appendix by pointing outward. Appendix X3 doesn't try to be the last word on AI. That would be impossible. Instead, it points you to additional PMI resources and external resources for further study. And it's careful about how those resources are positioned. They're optional, they're not required reading, and they're not compliance checkpoints. They exist to support continued learning as AI evolves, as tools change, and as new risks and opportunities emerge. PMBOK 8 treats AI literacy as an ongoing responsibility and not a box to check. The appendix gives you a foundation. The resources gives you paths forward. What you do with them and how thoughtfully you apply them is up to you. When you step back, the message of Appendix X3 is simple. AI changes how work is done. It accelerates analysis, it expands capability, and it reshapes delivery environments. But it does not change what matters the most. Accountability stays human. Ethical responsibility doesn't move to a model. And judgment remains essential, especially when decisions become uncomfortable. That's why this appendix fits so cleanly into PMBOK 8 as a whole. Principles come before tools. Governance comes before automation. And value comes before novelty. AI can help you move faster. It can help you see more, and it can help you do better work. But it can't decide what should be done. That responsibility is still up to you. Appendix X4 reframes procurement in a way that's long overdue. Its purpose isn't teaching contracting mechanics. It's to modernize procurement thinking inside of a value framework. PMBOK 8 treats procurement as a strategic function, one that shapes outcomes long before a contract is signed. This appendix walks through procurement strategy and make or buy decisions that set direction early. It covers bid processes and source selection, not as paper exercises, but as moments where risk, capability, and alignment are chosen. It explores contract types and models, recognizing that how you contract directly influences behavior, incentives, and collaboration. It also acknowledges what actually happens in the real world, emerging trends in contract management, claims administration, and the ethical pressures that surface when money, scope, and accountability collide. The through line is consistent. Procurement decisions are value decisions. They require informed judgment. They demand ethical conduct. And they must stay aligned with both the project goals and the larger organizational objective. Appendix X4 makes this clear. Contracts don't just protect the work, they shape how the work gets done. Appendix X5 answers a question that readers have almost immediately. Why does PMBOK 8 look so different? This appendix traces how the guide has evolved, not randomly and not reactively, but based on evidence. It explains the research, practitioner input, and sources that inform the changes in the 8th edition. It walks through the major shifts, why prescriptive process flows were reduced, why principles were refined, and why performance domains replace siloed knowledge areas. The message is clear. These changes weren't made to be disruptive. They were made to be accurate. PMBOK 8 reflects how work is actually done today in complex, fast-moving, and uncertain environments where judgment matters more than rigid process. Appendix X5 reinforces that the shift towards principles, performance domains, and human decision-making was intentional. Not a break from discipline, but an evolution of it. Before you close the book, there's one thing that needs to be said clearly. What you've just walked through is not an exhaustive retelling of PMBOK 8. It's an interpretation. PMBOK 8 still contains depth, detail, examples, models, methods, artifacts, and references that matter. It's meant to be used, revisited, pulled off the shelf when the work gets unclear. This video doesn't replace that. What it does is surface the through line. Because when you step back and look at this text, the message is unmistakable. Project management is no longer about managing work. It's about enabling value delivery in complex systems through informed leadership. That's why principles come before processes, why domains replace silos, why tailoring is expected, why judgment is emphasized over compliance, and why accountability never leaves the human in the room. PMBOK 8 doesn't lower the bar, it raises it. It asks you not just to execute, but to think, not just to follow, but to decide, not just to deliver, but to steward value. And the more complex the environment becomes, the more that responsibility matters. Use PMBOK as it was intended. as a reference, as support, and as a guide for better decisions, not as a script. Because in the end, no framework delivers value on its own. People do.